Okay, welcome everyone. We're beginning a new mini-series tonight, Exploring the Soul. I'm actually quite excited about this because I have spent the whole week learning and researching, and very, very good for me. I hope good for everyone else as well. As you can imagine, it's a big subject. And it's something that we have to build kind of like step by step. A lot to say, but we're going to get going, and there'll be not clear how many classes, but a good amount of classes. And each time we'll be able to share more information. So with any idea or concept that we would like to explore, the first thing we do is go to see what the Torah has to say about the soul. And we're going to go back to the story of Bereshit. And this is where we're going to find the basis of the idea of the soul. And so we're going to begin already on the third day of creation. The third day of creation is the creation of vegetation, of trees and grasses and herbs. That's what's mentioned. And we'll notice that vegetation is alive, is definitely alive, but in the treatment of vegetation, there's no mention of soul or even like living soul, as we will see with the animals, starting with the fish and then the birds and then the animals and then humans. But we will be exploring, even though if you would ask someone like very quickly, does vegetation have consciousness or a soul? So most people would immediately say, no, that they're alive, but they don't have a soul or consciousness. There happens to be an enormous amount of recent research, and none of it is conclusive, but there is many, many experiments being done and research that might change our view of this completely. That we'll get back to. But we start the first time one of the words for soul is mentioned is on the fourth day of creation. And, excuse me, on the fifth day of creation. And it begins with the water-based animals. It doesn't say fish here explicitly, but it's the first chapter, the 20th verse. It says, "V'yomer Elokim yishratzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya." And God said, let the waters produce and regenerate the nefesh chaya, the living soul. And then it says, and the birds, and then it mentions the great sea serpents. And again, it says nefesh chaya, and then all of the insects and lizards and that whole class of creation. And God blessed them to be fruitful and multiply. So this is the first mention of a word that connotes soul, nefesh chaya. So I will mention now something we've discussed a number of times, that the soul is called by 5 names. This is actually a very ancient Midrash, Bereshit Rabbah. It says that the soul is called by 5 names. It's understood that it's not just 5 names, but there are 5 levels to the soul. And it's mentioned nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and Yechida. What's interesting, very interesting, is that it gives the list twice. The first time, it's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Yechida, Chaya. The second time, it's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida, which is the way that all of Kabbalah and Chassidut learns it. So here, it's 5 names of the soul, and really 5 levels of soul. Levels, we mean that each part of the soul, each level of the soul has different powers, abilities, and that, of course, we're going to explain and explore in length. So on the 5th day, this is when the animals are created. And so here it says that in the 25th verse, it says, see, first it says in the 24th, Vayomer Elokim totzi ha'oretz nefesh chaya. God said, let the earth bring forth living souls. So this is very significant, as we will discuss, this idea that the earth brings forth the living souls. And that's by Adam also, by a human being. That's the language. And then it says, V'yas Elokim et chayat ha'oretz, that God made the animals. First, the what we'll call the wild animals, and then the behema. These are the more domesticated animals. Okay, and so now we get to man. Man is also, this is the 6th day. Man is created on the 6th day. And it says, Vayomer Elokim na'aseh adam b'tzalmenu k'demutenu. And God said, let us create man in our image and in our likeness. So this is the first mention of a human being. And then we're going to see that in the second reading, or the second telling of the story of creation, it goes back over the creation of man. And that will be one of the cardinal verses that we'll be discussing tonight. But here, we want to understand, why does it say Na'aseh Adam? We will make. So everyone asks, well, who else is creating man along with God? That it says in the plural, Na'aseh Adam, we will make man. So Rashi brings a very, very interesting thing. He says, even though this verse could give fuel to many mistakes about God, that there's more than one God, that there's more than one God that created man. But Rashi brings, it's from the Midrash, where despite the fact that people might make a mistake the way they understand this, the Torah includes it anyways, or God chose to include it anyways, to show the importance of even a senior person consulting with a junior person, because it shows God's humbleness and God's respect for creation. So it's a very, very interesting Rashi that despite people perhaps making a mistake and understand, we will make man, that it says this anyways. So the question now is, what does it mean in our image and our likeness? So Rashi is very brief here. He says our image means our structure. In other words, that even though this is another possibility of people making a huge mistake, about divinity is, even though God has no physical form and there's no real language that can describe the essence of God, but the word image brings up the idea of a physical image. And so it's understood in a metaphorical, allegorical, symbolic way that the human body is somehow represents godliness. So again, this could lead to a lot of mistakes that people would make. Image is bitsalmenu. A tselem, in fact, a tselem is sometimes used as making an idol. So that's why it's a very subtle and sensitive word here in our image. But the early Kabbalah, based on another verse, the other verse is Mibsari Echeza Eloka. This is from the book of Job. From my flesh, I envision God. So this was understood in the early Kabbalah to mean that, again, that the physical body is somehow connected to divinity. Now, for those who are part of our series on the Sfirot, so we learned this, the idea that the Sfirot are somewhat set up like a human body. You have the right side, which is the right arm, and you have the left side, which is the left arm. You have Chachma, Bin, and Dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in the head. You have Teferet in the heart. You have Netzach in the right leg. You have Hod in the left leg. And you have Yesod in the sexual organ. It's like a body. And the Zohar, in fact, in most cases, uses body parts as a symbol of the Sfirot. Chassidut, and Rav Ginsburg says that this is one of the most important contributions of Chassidut, that they took the same verse, Mibsari Echezeh Elokah, from my flesh, and they understood the flesh here is not physical flesh. It's more the inner essence of the soul, that through that we can envision God. So that's a very, very important thing to say here. Now, the second word, the first word we just said is image, B'tsalmein, and the second was kedemutenu, in our likeness. And here Rashi just says two things. He says lahavin ulahaskil. So what does it mean to be in the likeness of God? Is to understand and to have intellect. That's how Rashi explains it. Now, he only says two words, but this is very important because here we see that going back to the fish are called nefesh chaya. They have a living soul. And the birds and the animals and human beings. So what makes us different? So we're going to explore the verse that will tell us what makes us different. But Rashi is already telling us is not that certain animals are not smart. Some animals are incredibly smart and have incredible abilities. A bat has a radar system built into their minds that is so advanced. And you have fish that swim, salmon. They swim 4,000 miles away from where they're born, and they return to spawn in the same place that they're born. And birds here in Israel, I've seen it, that every year in the spring and the fall, there are mass migrations of birds. Israel is one of the most important bird watching places on earth. millions, tens of millions of birds pass over Israel twice a year, going to and from Africa to Europe. And each generation, they know exactly where to go. So animals are smart, but you don't see animals building computers or spaceships to Mars, or Zoom that allows us all over the world to be sitting together right now. So this is what Rashi tells us, what distinguishes it, what's in the likeness of God is a certain type of intellect that no other being has. Okay, now we're going to go to the second chapter, the 7th verse. And this is when there's a second, we'll call it retelling of the story of creation and of man. And that's when the Garden of Eden is introduced for the first time, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, and the snake, the whole thing. And here it goes back over the creation of man. And for our purposes, this is an incredibly important verse. So again, it's the 7th verse in the 2nd chapter. And it says like this: Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama vayifach be'apav nishmat chayim vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. So it says, and God formed the man. Here it's really the human being, because we learned already that the first Adam was male and female. And he formed him from the dust of the earth, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and Adam became a living being, or a living soul. Okay, so this verse is pregnant with meaning. Now, I'm going to point out that we already learned that in the first so I didn't read that pasuk. It's the 27th pasuk. This is after God says, let us make man in our image and our likeness. Then it says, Vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tsalmo b'tselem Elokim bara oto zachar nekeva bara otam. That Elokim created the human in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So again, there's much to talk about. And as I said in the beginning, we have to kind of build this slowly. A lot of this we will be going back over. My purpose tonight is just to show the sources for the idea of soul. So going back to the 2nd chapter, the 7th verse, we notice the first time it says that God created, bara. Here it says he formed, v'yetzer, he formed. And in addition, here we see an amazing thing. There's a way to see all 5 levels of soul in this one verse. How do we do that? So in this verse and the previous 2 verses about the creation of man. So here, the last thing it says that Adam became a nefesh chaya. So this is 2 of the names of the levels of soul. Nefesh and Chaya. The key, though, is that God blew into his nostril the Nishmat Chayim. This is the Neshama. The blowing is the Ruach. Ruach, which we usually translate as spirit, but Ruach also means wind, blowing. So here he blew into him the soul of life. So that's the ruach and the neshama. And it's God who is blowing into Adam. And we're told two things, that when a person blows, let's say a shofar, well, to blow the shofar, first you have to very deeply breathe in. And then, like the Zohar says, that a person breathes out from their innards. And the other explanation is that when a person blows out, something of their essence is flowing out also. So this is the Yechida, because the Yechida is the divine spark in the soul. So here we have all 5 levels of the soul in one verse, really. We have nefesh, we have ruach, we have neshama, we have chaya, and we have yechida, all in this one verse. And in the Midrash that gives the 5 names to the soul, it doesn't bring a source that this is the source, but my intuitive feeling is that this may be the place where they learned it from, because I have all 5 concepts here. You have all 5 concepts, because just like God is, Yechida means unique. So just like God is unique, in all of creation, a human being is unique, different from any other creature, even though it shares what's called nefesh chaya with all the other animals and fish and birds. They also have a nefesh. Again, this is something that we will develop further. But in this verse, so what do the commentaries say? What is this nishmat chayim, this soul of life? So Rashi. So Rashi says, again, in short, he says, Deya v'dibur, knowledge and speech. Now, all animals correspond with each other, but it's not the same kind of speech or thinking or correspondence. Now, I'll make a statement which is very, very important, and then we're going to review very quickly these 5 levels of soul, so we're clear what we're talking about. So the nefesh, this is called sometimes it's called the animal soul, because the nefesh is attached to the body, whereas the other levels of soul, in a certain way, hover above the attachment to the body. So animals have a nefesh, and a human being has a nefesh, and that nefesh for an animal is really based on 2 things: survival and pleasure. An animal does not have complex thought processes. Its actions are fueled and directed really by just 2 things: survival and pleasure. And part of survival, by the way, is giving birth to a new generation. Animals are, if you look through the whole animal kingdom, are hardwired to produce, to have a new generation. And many animals, in a sense, give their lives. Many animals, after they spawn or they give birth, many of them die. Not all of them, but many of them do. But it's hardwired, and that's part of the survival instinct. Now, a human being has that also, but we have higher levels of soul, And that's the importance of nishmat chayim, that is what makes a human being unique, is this soul of life. And so Rashi says this soul of life, again, is Deya V'Dibur, of knowledge and the ability to speak. And in the end of the sentence where it says that Adam became L'Nefesh Chaya, became a living being or a living soul. So Onkelos translates it a speaking soul. The other animals that are called Nefesh Chaya, so Rashi says that God gave life to them. In other words, we don't talk about, let's say, water or rocks or planets as having life. But even that we're going to get into. It's not as simple as that sounds. But the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom all have life. But here, Rashi says about the animal kingdom that they have life force. Onkelos says a speaking spirit. Again, to differentiate between humans and animals. But nonetheless, the lowest level of soul is called the nefesh. And this is why in the Torah, we are forbidden when we eat animals, or those who eat animals, to eat a kosher animal, the blood must be removed we do it by salting. And the Torah says over and over again, not to eat the blood of an animal. It says because the nefesh is in the blood. And if you would eat the blood of an animal, in a sense, you would be ingesting the nefesh of the animal, which is not considered a good thing. We have our own nefesh. If the blood is removed, then in a sense, we're removing the nefesh so that it doesn't, in a sense, bring us down, bring us into a pure animal type of consciousness. The next level of soul is called the ruach, sometimes called spirit. And this is called the emotional aspect of a human being. The neshama is considered the intellectual level of a human being. And that's why about nishmat chayim, so Rashi says, Deya V'Dibur, knowledge and speaking. And before, in the creation of man, he talked about the likeness of God being to understand and to have intellect. So the level of the neshama is the level of the intellect. The chaya is considered the bridge between the conscious intellect and the supraconscious aspects of a human being, especially will, ratzon. And then yechida, the highest level of soul, is considered what is called the chelek eloka mima'al, an actual part of God. And that we saw in when God blew into the first human being a nishmat chayim. That is what differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom, is that we have something that nothing else has. Now, there's an amazing Rashi based on a Midrash. And the Midrash says like this, that on the first day of creation, so God created heaven and earth. And the Midrash is called the Elyonim and the Tachtonim, the higher reality, higher beings, and the lower reality. We'll call it spirituality and physicality. That will become translated into soul and body. And on the second day, it was all about the Rikia, about the firmament. and dividing between the upper waters and the lower waters. So the Midrash says, so on the first day, upper and lower are created. On the second day, only upper. The third day is about the gathering of the waters and the creation of vegetation. So that's the lower. The fourth day is the sun and the moon and the stars. That's the upper. The fifth day are the fish and all of the insects and even the birds, but they're not like way up there. That's called the lower world. So again, first day is upper and lower. Second is upper. Third is lower. Fourth is upper. Fifth is lower. So the Midrash says when it came to the sixth day, so the animals are created. Those are the lower. But when it came to man, like, would man be created only from above or from below? Are they Elyonim or Tachtonim? And so the Midrash says in order that everything would be balanced between upper and lower. So on the sixth day, Adam was created from the upper and the lower. So that means the first day and the sixth day are upper and lower, and the other ones alternate between upper and lower. So there's a balance. Now, this is a very, very deep Midrash because this is how we explain the name Adam, that the Aleph is the upper and the Dam, the blood, is the lower, or soul and body. The Aleph represents the soul. It represents spirituality, divinity. And the Dam, the blood, represents the body and the lower level of soul. So a human being is a composite of two opposite energies, really. And call it our task, our mission of every single human being is to learn to balance these two forces, these two energies, soul and body. So I'm going to take this idea just a little bit farther, and that is that if we go back with the creation of man, so we see that at one time it said that God formed man. Another time it says he created man. And there's one reference to God having made with the word asot. So these are the names of the worlds: Asiyah, Yitzira, and Bria. And of course, the Yechidah, the highest level of soul, which is the divine spark. So this is the world of Atzilut. So here in this one verse, we see that either explicitly or hinted to is the idea of all five levels of soul. And also there is a hint in the verbs that are used in the different telling of the story of the creation of man, and the nefesh chaya, the word asok, that God made the living beings. So we have all, and God as Atzilut, as the world of emanation, all is emanating from the higher world, from God. So what conclusion can we draw from this? So just today I saw an explanation I had never seen before when it said that God created man le nefesh chaya, to, in a sense, to be a nefesh chaya. But the letter lamed, le, didn't have to be there. God created man a nefesh chaya. Didn't have to say le. So this one Perush said that this teaches us that since we see that all of the animal kingdom has what's called a nefesh chaya, and a whole type of angel, this is something hopefully we'll get into a different time, are called chayot kodesh, the holy living beings. In the prophecy of Ezekiel, the vision of Ezekiel, which is referred to as Maaseh Merkavah, the workings of the chariot. So he saw different types of angels, the Ophanim, like they're called the wheel angels, the Chayot Kodesh, the holy living beings, and the Seraphim, the fiery angels. But here we see that the word Chaya also relates to not just Nefesh Chaya, which is the lowest level, but also to the highest level. And so this explanation said that this is to teach us, this extra letter Lamed, to teach us that everything that we do affects the upper worlds, the Chayot Kodesh, and the lower worlds, the lower Nefesh Chaya, the animals. In other words, everything that a human being does, and this is through the power of the soul, affects all of the worlds. This is actually one of the major teachings of Kabbalah, is especially the Arizal, is that every thought, speech, and action has incredible ramifications in all of the worlds, more than we can even envision. So the Maggid, when he was discussing the four Kabbalistic worlds, so in one sense, we look at them as like a hierarchy. There's a lower world, Asiyah, and then there's a higher world, Yetzirah, and even a higher world of Bria, and then there's the highest world of Atzilut. But in a deeper way, it's a holistic picture. So the Maggid said, Atzilut is here. It's not this world way, way up there. All the worlds are here. So the Arizal said the following, and actually in one of the main squares in the old city of Tzfat, there is this sign up on a wall, and he said, Ha'adam olam katan. Well, let me get this right. Yeah, Adam olam katan, a person is a little world, meaning the microcosm of everything. V'ha'olam Adam gadol, and the world is a big Adam. So this is like the theory of relativity. Here you have the world is actually a manifestation of a big man. And a man is a manifestation of the entire world. And so in the few minutes that we have left, so Rav Ginsburg, based on the idea that we've discussed many times, the idea that from the Baal Shem Tov, that in every letter, in every point of time and space, in every circumstance, in every level of existence, there are worlds, souls, and divinity. And so Rav Ginsburg, in his book, this is one of the books that we will be using extensively. It's called The Anatomy of the Soul. And the first thing he says is the soul is the bridge, is the spiritual bridge between the experience of worlds and the experience of divinity. In other words, the soul is in a unique position, a human being, because of the soul, is in a unique position to bridge physical and spiritual, body and soul, and all of the Kabbalistic worlds, and can make a unity between God and human beings, and create the unity that is the essence of godliness. But in a sense, God has made us partners through the powers of the soul, which we will be exploring what those powers are, to make unity in the world. Okay, I think this is a good place to stop. I just want to review. Yes, I see Avram just put the link for this book if anyone wants to get it. It's called The Anatomy of the Soul, and we will be using this extensively. So as a review, a wrap up here. So the first thing we see is that the idea of soul is not exclusive to human beings. There's a certain level where the entire animal kingdom has soul. And one of the things we will be exploring is the idea and the question, does vegetation have soul/consciousness? Because here, when we're talking about soul, it's very, very connected to the concept of consciousness. And we know from quantum physics, they're even exploring the idea that all particles, all atoms, have a certain level of consciousness. Now, we're going to have to explain, well, what that consciousness is. It's not our consciousness, but there appears to be a level of consciousness throughout all of created reality. And we could actually say that in a certain way, the world, the physical world, the creation is the body, and the soul is godliness, is divinity, because nothing can exist from a rock to an atom, to a tree, to a fish, to an elephant, to a human being without a spark of God. And so, in a sense, everything has a spark of God, which means has a spark of consciousness. And we will explore the different levels of consciousness with the great emphasis on human consciousness, but it is a very, very fascinating idea of all of reality having consciousness in one way or another. That's where we're going to start next week. For those who came on late, I do have to apologize that there's not going to be our usual wonderful dialogue after the class. But as I explained, that tonight is Yom HaZikaron, and in exactly 5 minutes, the sirens are going to blare all over Israel. And I'm running right now to a ceremony to honor all those who have fallen to make the reality of Israel a possibility. So thank you all, and we will see you next week.